All right. Hello and welcome. A very special episode today. It's a dual podcast episode. So this is the Zero podcast and the Hypertrophy Academy podcast. Your podcast is brand new, right? You've done one episode?
One episode. We're just a baby at the moment, but I'm hoping it picks up.
Nice. Well, we're going to do this joint episode. This is in line with also the promotion of our upcoming course around hypertrophy for powerlifters. But we just wanted to showcase some value and have a pretty candid chat about the whole subject of strength, of powerlifting, of call it accessories, but primarily the where hypertrophy belongs in all of this, right? Before we do that, what's your goal with the Hypertrophy Academy podcast, and where can people find it if they want to jump in and see that first episode? Or they found it if they're listening to it now, but you know what I mean. If they find it through Zero.
If they're on the Zero page, you can go Hypertrophy Academy on YouTube. Should be probably the only thing that comes up, but it is also in my bio if you follow me on Instagram.
Which you should.
Deklan, DXKLAN. It'll be at the bottom of my bio, or you can YouTube Hypertrophy Academy podcast, and it's also on Spotify.
Yeah, and what are you trying to do with it, man? Like, sort of, what's the mission of the podcast? What information are you hoping to share with the world?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, my goal, honestly, my motivation was just like, I like talking, and a few people like listening, and so that's a perfect match for me. And I can only chew off Dana's ear about cool stuff that I talk about in the gym for so long. And if people can learn from it, then everybody wins. But it's just a place to connect. I get a lot of like DMs and questions, and it's hard to sort of address, I'm sure you do as well. Individual questions just take up a lot of time. So if I can sort of hit the nail on the head for a few people in 45 minutes on YouTube, and that's easy for me to do once a week, and people tune in and get something out of it, that's the goal.
Yeah, man. One thing I've found consistently with podcasting, with education of any sort, that's an internal benefit for the educator, is just that idea of the more you articulate your thoughts, the more you're able to externalize them, hold up a mirror and be like, do I actually believe this, or is this something I need to change the way I'm wording? Like, I don't know if anyone else does this, and I'm sure all the serious people do. I actually listen back to every single podcast episode I do, because I want to catch myself out and be like, oh, I actually said it this way, and I should have said it this way. And I actually messed that up on the Elite FDS podcast I did recently, where I was talking about the subject that we are talking about today, which is all this hypertrophy stuff around strength training and powerlifting. Whereas I'd worded something along the lines of, strength is not an adaptation that the muscle makes. But then I followed it up with, we don't make muscles stronger, which in my head, that language is incorrect. Strength is not the adaptation, but a muscle being able to express more strength means that the muscle is stronger. So that's just a small example. It's just about refining that process, right? What would you say the core message that you want to share with the world is through the Hypertrophy Academy podcast? You don't have to have one.
No, that's a good, no. Well, my first thing is that strength training is easy, and not easy, but simple. Simple is the right word. So my thing in my bio on Instagram is simplifying strength training, because it's overcomplicated and undercomplicated depending on who you talk to. And I think there's a nice medium ground where some people who watch my stuff might think that we're more on the complicated side. Others might think that I'm being reductionist. It just depends on, who you're talking to, really, how deep in the certain niches you're in. People in powerlifting certainly think that I'm overcomplicating things, and some people in bodybuilding think it's the opposite. But I think that there's a middle ground there where we can be intelligent and still train hard. And of course, everybody will agree with that, right? Like, you'd have to be an idiot to say that you can't think hard and train hard, because no one would disagree with that. It'd be a bad look. But when it comes to actually doing that, that's where people start to disagree. And so I think that we have struck a really nice middle ground with like staying up to date with things, being super, super nerdy, off camera, behind the scenes, learning all the nerdy stuff to then be able to simplify it for literally everybody. And of course, then that's beneficial for our athletes as well. So like, we do powerlifting, we do bodybuilding mostly, we do nutrition, and we do even more niche stuff like gut health, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to bring all that stuff together, and the podcast will just be like a little mini snippet of that. But I think it's like I said, I want to make it more accessible, and I want to make it easy, or simple rather, I think is the right word.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a big problem with short form content. Is like you want to give as much value in a short snippet as possible, and I mean, you know this better than anyone. It's just like, okay, if I'm going to tell them this, they need to understand this. Okay, if I'm going to tell them that part, well, then they need to understand this. Before long, you're trying to describe a lat pull down, but you're thinking about sarcomeres. You know, you've bridged the gap so far, and it's like you're exactly right. You land in the middle. All the sarcomere people are like, well, actually, and all the fucking meathead peoples are just like, well, don't worry about that, just lift and get heavy. It's like it's always the challenge, and I think you'll find the podcasting journey will help a lot with that, because not only are you able then to expand on your thoughts, the more you expand on them, the better you get at condensing them down to hard-hitting little messages, right?
It's funny that you said that, because while I was in the UK, I had to like shorten my content and I had to make it in 5 minutes before I left the hotel. And my engagement went crazy. And I guess that speaks to how easy social media can be. Like, I put all this effort into content when I'm home, and it performs decently well. And then I go away and spend 30 seconds on a reel that came to me in a dream. And my monthly views are at 5 million, which is 5 times my normal. And it's like, it sells. Like, that shitty stuff actually sells. But when you're forced to simplify it like that, the algorithm might appreciate it more, but you inherently get more arguments. So by being like short and specific and sort of like, here's one takeaway, here's a 10-second takeaway that you can use in your training, and people do not like that. Yeah. You have to, you know, you have to talk for 90 seconds fast, like I talk, to really hit every nail on the head, so that 1 or 2 people don't get wildly upset in the comments and misunderstand you, but then everyone else stops watching because they don't care.
Yeah.
You literally cannot win.
And then there's also some like benefit to people getting a bit upset in the comments, right? Yeah. Feeds the algorithm that little bit more. Oh man, we could sit here and talk about content stuff all day, but that's not what we're here for. We're here for providing content. And so, yeah, I mean, we've been putting this course together, Hypertrophy for the Powerlifter. And I've been on a mission, you've been on a mission, and spreading the word more and more lately around this whole idea of that major question. And I think this question that I'm about to ask really is the foundation that any strength coach, and really bodybuilding coach as well, needs to garner their understanding on. And I think it's been the missing piece for a very long time in our little world. And the question is simply, what makes a muscle stronger? Like we've discussed at length, you know, the modern powerlifting programming meta is not modern, it's a repeat of the past, but you've got this new wave of coaches, and they're coming in and rethinking, reimagining, redesigning the wheel on a question that we already know the answer to. And it's almost frustrating to watch.
You know, I actually had the other day I found myself agreeing with something that Louis Simmons says, and as someone who was like well after his time, that is not something like that might sound normal to you guys listening if you're maybe from the ZeroW podcast, but like for someone who's on the younger side, came into powerlifting after that doesn't happen very often. And we might touch on what that was later on, but I think, yeah, there's always pendulum swings with programming. Like there was this, you know, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, it had to be super specific, and like, you know, in the peak we're doing like 4 bench singles and benching the day before and all that crazy stuff. And now it's back to like, oh, just like you're overthinking. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I've noticed, at least I'm not in the industry as much anymore, you know, in terms of watching other people train, but I have seen, you know, from the limited exposure I have, it's swinging back to like, it's actually a lot more simple than that, which...
Yeah. And which is a good thing, but it's come about. So when I say before that I watch it with frustration, what I mean by that is not frustration in terms of like, oh, you're doing everything wrong. It's more frustration in watching people with really, really sound logic and thought processes building their justification for programming, but missing the mark in terms of what they're actually trying to achieve. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to move my primary from here to here, and we're going to tweak my tertiary here because I was getting too much fatigue and I wasn't feeling ready on this day. And they're thinking about it really well. Like they're meticulous, they're taking data, they're getting feedback, they're really thinking about programming.
There's like 2 or 3 puzzle pieces missing.
Exactly. So that's kind of what I want to talk about with you today. If you was to say there's 2 or 3 puzzle pieces missing, where would you start? What's the biggest missing puzzle piece?
Well, people are not going to want to hear this depending. But fatigue, I think, we have to mention that. And like, I'm to some people going to sound like I'm overcomplicating it. If you're from my channel, maybe you think I'm undercomplicating it or simplifying it, but it's going to affect skill and coordination, right? And we touched on this a bunch in the course, and all the fatigue mechanisms, but we will not perform our best motor program, our movement pattern, our skill technique, whatever you want to call it, when we are fatigued. And if we have that understanding, then you would logically go, okay, well, we don't want to be fatigued on our main day, right? Which is not a revolutionary concept. Everyone will tell you that. Some people have these like fatigue singles or like the benching prior to like go in fatigued. I don't know what the reasoning for that is, but we could all agree we don't want to be tired when we try our best, right? That's not a new thing, but it's the puzzle pieces of like what fatigue is and how it's created and how much it matters and what causes it and what to look for as well, because fatigue is a reduction in performance, right? So it's like, oh, I wasn't fatigued today, but I just like, I couldn't hit my best. Well, then you were fatigued. Like it's the definition is a reduction in performance.
Yeah.
So like if you're getting stronger week to week, then fatigue probably isn't a big issue, right? We would agree. But you can still get stronger while being fatigued. And it's something that you always say. It's like, yeah, they got stronger, but imagine how much stronger they would have got if they had done this. So it's like, imagine how much better they could be. It's like, you can still get better with fatigue. That's why silly programming still works. And we use that phrase like hypertrophy is stupidly forgiving. That was Darian Bates. I think you know who that is. But she said that was a great quote. And so you can still make great progress, not understanding.
Can you say the quote again? I haven't actually heard that before.
Hypertrophy is stupidly forgiving. I think it's great.
And what do you mean by that?
An idiot can still get insane. We all know someone and we look at them and we go, how is that person?
Yes.
How do they look like that? Or how are they that strong? Or how are they not injured? We all know someone like that, multiple probably. And yeah, there are coaches who, it has to be this way. It doesn't. Like you can do whatever you want really, but we can just do it so much better. And if we're going to spend powerlifting, 20 hours a week in the gym, bodybuilding a bit less, we should probably understand it and do it really well.
Yeah. And I'd challenge you and say, if you're spending 20 hours in the gym as a powerlifter, you're doing too much anyway. Or you're doing a lot of texting. Like
I think there's a lot of like texting and like gummy, like Sour Patch Kids, which are a terrible intra-workout carb source, but we won't go there. Terrible.
Yeah. No, man. It's interesting, the fatigue piece. The last the solo podcast that I did was about the conundrum between skill and fatigue, because the current programming meta would suggest that it's built on the false premise that squat, bench, deadlift are high skill movements, and they're very low skill movements. It's just like the lens that most people look at them through is, okay, I'm looking at a squat and comparing it to a bicep curl, rather than looking at a squat and comparing it to a golf swing or throwing darts or whatever it may be. And so, yes, a squat is high skill compared to a biceps curl, but in terms of the grand scheme of things, it's actually reasonably low skill and it's high fatigue creating, right? And so, exactly as Deklan just said, if you are fatigued, you can't manage the skill. And powerlifters get caught in this cycle where, okay, it's high skill, therefore I need to do high frequency. Do higher frequency, get more fatigued. Now that you're more fatigued, you can't nail the skill because you're fatigued. You're thinking to yourself, the skill's off, I feel rusty, I need to do more to get better at it. Like, you create your own lack of skill by doing too much, potentially. And it's a scary cycle to break, especially if you've just come off the back of, okay, I switched from good frequency bench to ultra high frequency bench. I made some gains. I don't want to go backwards. I'm now scared to go from 5 days back to 3 days or back to 2 days. It creates this fear, and then people get stuck in that conundrum, that cycle, and then just get hurt or don't make progress, and that's it. And like you pointed out before, I think more and more people are starting to see this now. And what we are talking about is basically the science behind it. So fatigue being the big puzzle piece, is there a quick and dirty definition of fatigue that you would give before we move to the next puzzle piece?
Yeah, it's a reduction in performance, right? So if you track everything closely, powerlifters usually tracking their SBD. Now, there's a few variables there with SBD, right? Like if you have one bad squat session, okay, that's whatever. It's not necessarily that you're under recovered. Could be, but it could be other things. Like you can literally just like get a bit distracted on the top set, and that could, there's a lot of things. But if you're actually tracking your accessories and they are getting stronger, then, well, we don't have a fatigue issue. So the thing about fatigue is that it makes you weaker, right? Now, we're not always expressing strength maximally or anywhere near it in powerlifting. Most people spend most of their time between like RP 4 and 8 or 5 and 8, depending on which country you're in. If you're in, is it France, where maybe it's like 8 to 10? Is that?
I don't know, probably.
The French lifters are crazy, but like most people are between 5 and 8, right? And so you're not always maximally expressing it. So you may not know from SBD if you are fatigued, because you can probably get away with being fatigued in that RPE range before it starts to have a big impact, right? So above 8, say like 8 to 9 or 8 to 10, in that range is where we just like have a bad meet, for example. How did that happen? Like prep went really well, but like then I was weak on meet day, and the data shows that we should have been good in this week 5, but we weren't. And it's like, that's where maybe then you can say, oh, that was definitely fatigue. But in that range, and the point here is that's where we spend most of our time. You probably won't know you're fatigued necessarily from SBD unless you have extremely good, like specific and good technique, like the Noriegas of the bench world, right? You'll notice pretty quickly because there's a tiny margin for error. But the point I'm making here is you probably won't know for sure if you're fatigued or how fatigued you are from SBD because you're not testing the waters enough unless you're like a teenage kid who maxes out all the time. Where you will notice, and this is where, the more bodybuilding side of it comes in, is on accessories. So, track your accessories. I've been saying that for 6 years regularly, right? And that's, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but like that data, if you actually pay attention to it, so like pec deck, 2 sets on Monday, 2 sets of flat press on Thursday. If we look at how the weeks progress and I go 1 rep added here, 2.5 kilos added here, 2.5 there, none that week we maintained 2.5. That for me would be amazing. Mm-hmm. I'm super consistent. I've been training for a long time. But if you don't have that data and you change things up all the time and you don't track well, like you'll just never know. Oh, I had a good week on pec deck. The next week I skipped a set, so I changed the circumstances. The week after, like my rest times were too long because I was talking, and then I lost some, potentiation effect, and the second set was undershot or overshot. Like if we just fuck around, are we allowed to swear?
Yeah,
if we mess
your podcast.
If we fuck around, like you're just never gonna know. So as anal as it seems to some people when it comes to tracking, like the accessories are the easiest way to spot fatigue because you'll have to fight tooth and nail to make them progress. And if you think that's not the case, you're either new or you change your program so often that progression is easy because it's a new exercise every 6 weeks and you get sick coordination gains. But like if we're talking a movement that you've done for years, like a pec deck or, the staples, like a leg extension is probably the most universal, maybe not for powerlifters. I don't know, training quads.
It is for my powerlifters.
Yeah, right. So let's say leg extension, like that's probably a movement we've all done for years on end. If you've actually pushed it hard and you're a seasoned lifter, you'll have to fight to increase that, right? Yep. If that's going up, you're good. There's no issue. Could we make it go up faster? Sure. We'd have to look at the program. Maybe we could be a little bit less fatigued because exercise is inherently fatiguing. So there's always going to be some. You can't avoid it. It's just the degree of it, right? But like I said, you may not find out you're fatigued on SBD till week 5 or week 6. And then it's too late because it was 5 or 6 weeks later than you should have known, right? Because that's when the SBD gets heavy enough that you go, oh, that went really poorly. Why did that happen? Maybe we're fatigued, but we just wasted that block then. Well, not wasted, but it could have been far more productive.
Yes.
So it's again, we go back to that, like, it is stupidly forgiving in that, like, you can get stronger, you can get bigger, but let's just not waste our time. Like, let's just do it so much better.
Well, I mean, and the difficulty a lot of people listening to this are going to have, and this is no shade on anyone in particular or anything like that, but most people are just given programs, and I'm 100% guilty of dishing out programs like this in the past, where it's just your accessories are rows 3x10, RP 8, very, very vague. And just even thinking about this stuff now, I could probably be more specific with my programming to help monitor this with lifters. But you as a lifter need to have the wherewithal to actually push your accessories And if you're doing what your program says and it's not telling you to push your accessories, there's potentially a discussion to be had there, some questions to be asked there. What would you say to the camp of people that's going to say, well, I'm pushing my SBD, so I'm not actually seeing that much progress in my accessories because I'm coming into them tired from pushing my SBD?
Well, I just wholeheartedly reject the idea because we have anecdotes on the other side that show powerlifters can do that. Because, for example, my powerlifters, they do their SBD and they're pushing it, and then they crush their accessories too. So we can argue physiologically about whether it's possible, but we can just resort straight to an anecdote. It just reflects an issue in that program because, like, all the other good powerlifters are doing it. If you look at any of the top powerlifters, they're jacked or they have ridiculously specific technique that you could never pull off. So unless you've got the Colton Sumo or, like I said, the Noriega bench, unless you are one of those hyper specific technique guys who can get away with having less muscle, not that those people do, then they're all jacked, the Russell Orhis, right? So it can be done. So I would just reject it straight away. But like if our SBD, first we have to ask the question, what are we doing that for? Well, skill. Because you're not doing it for anything else. And we touched on all the strength mechanisms, right? You're just practicing the skill. Yeah, if you do some volume hard enough, there might be some hypertrophy, right? 3x5 on squats to RP8, that might cause some hypertrophy if you're newer. And we touched on motor unit recruitment and all that sort of thing.
Well, we do in the course. So maybe just give the people the quickest rundown ever of the six mechanisms.
Yeah, so there's 6 strength mechanisms, strength being the outcome of these 6. There's only 3 we really need to talk about. It's hypertrophy, skill, and motor unit recruitment. Hypertrophy being muscles getting bigger. Motor unit recruitment being basically being able to switch on more of the muscle fibers that make up the muscle. So like just think of it as a percentage out of 100. If you have 90 and we get to 92, you can switch on 2% more muscle fibers. You will be stronger. And then coordination and skill, which is why we do SBD. Coordination, skill are the same thing. So we're doing SBD because we need to practice, right? We're doing hypertrophy because we need to grow muscle. Now, there could be some crossover, and we touched on how those things can cross over and when you might train certain qualities and whatnot. You might get some extra motor unit recruitment out of your SBD when you're newer. You'd need specific methods when you are more experienced because it just gets harder to achieve that. You might get some hypertrophy out of your SBD if it's done, let's just say like a 3x7 on bench to like RP9. I don't know if anyone programs like that. That would probably grow some muscle. Yeah, it's a compound movement. Bench is maybe not the best example because it's, pecs, triceps, front delt. Something like a deadlift, you probably wouldn't use it for hypertrophy, but you could get some gains out of it. So you're realistically only doing that for skill, right? And then we have to ask the question, well, how much of it do we need to get those skill adaptations? Now, I'm not talking about maximal skill adaptation because that will inherently reduce the hypertrophy component. Now, and in simple terms, that would be like doing too much SBD frequency at the cost of your accessories, which is what we just talked about.
Yeah.
So like, I'm not talking about maximum skill acquisition because that will inherently take away from accessories. And we can argue all day about which one contributes more and which one's more important. And,
well, I mean, the fact of the matter is you can have both.
That's the point I'm
and
making.
You need to have both.
You can have both, right? So let's just, if I have to make up numbers, right? Let's say that you can, potentially get to like 98% skill where you're never perfect, but you're so close. If that comes at the cost of a decent enough chunk of hypertrophy, the question that I have was, would you be better at operating at like 94% skill, but having so much more hypertrophy? Because then you have bigger muscle fibers, right? And strength being an outcome, it is a combination of the six, but the 3 that I mentioned. And you really, it's up for debate which one contributes more and like which combination of the 3 main ones and the 2 big ones being skill and hypertrophy, which one contributes more? What's the better combination? Is skill here, hypertrophy here? Is that inherently better than like being a little more even or even hypertrophy up here and lifting like a bit of an idiot? Like, you know what I mean? And that's all arbitrary and open for debate, really.
Yeah. But I mean, you can see these examples in real time. You can see people, specialize in a particular lift and not seem to improve on it, but people are blind to the lack of improvement because of how outlandishly big that lift might be. You get a deadlifter that always pulls between 400 and 415 at every single comp all the time. Maybe their squat and bench is steadily increasing. Is that person a good powerlifter? No, they're a good deadlifter. And a good powerlifter is someone who's making progress consistently across the board. And I mean, that's a real-time example of somebody who's working on maximizing the skill at the expense of the things that will make you stronger in the long term. Because if you were to put some of these arbitrary figures on, okay, then in the long term, what are going to be the biggest contributors? Like if I want to be the best powerlifter I can, not right now, but in 20 years, what should my focus be of these three things: skill, motor unit recruitment, hypertrophy?
Well, that's where we say, well, it's like how, let's just say we can end up at that. We're going to end up where we're going to end up. Let's say it like that. Do you get there sooner? Do you get closer sooner and then have slower gains forever? Or do you stay away from that peak point for longer, but you still arrive there at the same point in time, right? So it's like, let's say I'm 23, I'm going to peak at 30. Do I just go a little bit more on the sustainable side, maybe a slightly lower injury risk because I'm just generally doing a little bit less, I feel less beat up, my sessions aren't as crazy, and I basically cruise to my peak at 30? Or alternatively, do I go, slightly maybe higher injury risk, speaking anecdotally here, of course, hyper frequency, hyper technique approach, whatever, I get like really close to my peak at 27 or earlier 26 and then like ride it to 30, right? And we still end up in the same place at 30, or do I just go sustainable to 30? So that's the two ways of looking at it, right? If we have the same finish point, and this is obviously hypothetically if you have the same finishing point, which is not how it works out, do you get there sooner or later? And that's really just like, how would you prefer to train is basically the question. Do you want to like max out, or get close to maxing out your skill in the first 4 years of training because you did 4 bench sessions and 3 squats and 17 deadlifts or whatever, and then get really bored and sick of it because you realize that, slow progress is real progress and that's how it is now that I've capped out on these gains? Or do you sort of just get there a little slower? In my opinion, it's more enjoyable the whole time. It's probably safer. And you get there to the same finishing point in a different way. Now, that is assuming that we both get there in the same way, assuming that nobody gets injured, assuming that that is how it works out. Of course, it doesn't work out that way. It doesn't.
Yeah, I'd say safety is actually, and people can argue as much as you want about risk injury, and it's impossible to classify injury risk, and it's very possible. Once you've been in it for a while, you can spot injuries coming from a while away, or you can see trends pretty clear cut. And I'd say that's probably one of the biggest concerns with the get it done now approach. The risk of injury is a bit higher, but then like you said, there's other softer things to consider, like the psychological state of getting there and then dealing with not making any progress, and then what that then potentially turns into, whether it's quitting, whether it's doing the wrong thing with programming to the point where you create even more real risk of injury, whatever it may be. I find that those people as well, if you're looking at the untested side of lifting, they're going to be the people that are going to jump on a shitload of gear and they break not only the most, but the hardest as well. And I mean, you see this time and time again. Just go back through the annals of powerlifting and look at all the lifters that were hot shit for a year or 2 or 3 maybe, and then disappear off the face of the earth, never to be seen again.
That's what I was going to say. Like the finishing in the same spot is it's carrying a lot of weight in that hypothetical, because it doesn't work that way. And we all anecdotally know, like you see people get really strong really fast. Like there are people coming to mind right now, I'm sure for you guys listening as well. And then you're like, actually, where is that person now? And of course that could be attributed to like a whole bunch of different things. But I can think of cases off the top of my head where people get really strong really quick. And now that I'm thinking about them, are either like haven't gotten any better since I was in powerlifting years ago, like competing, or just not even in the sport anymore. They're in jiu-jitsu, or I don't know what people do after they get injured and quit powerlifting. But I think that, in that hypothetical, they finish in the same spot, just get there at different rates. But I think realistically, if I had to put my money on it, that the people that see those big exponential gains at first, like whether it's the enhanced due to, well outrun their tendon adaptations, or the hyper specific like American powerlifting style where we get crazy technique gains for a year and then run into like chronic pain, or, over analyzing the programming, missing the bigger picture, whatever it might be. Those are the guys that drop off quicker, in my opinion, and never get to that hypothetical finishing point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, when you when you map out the opposite, you look at, okay, who was in powerlifting for a long time, consistently making progress and winning?
Josh Takua.
It's like, well, Josh Takua, jacked.
Yeah, that's
Brett Gibbs, jacked. Russell Orhe, jacked. Ed Cohen, jacked. Dan Green, jacked. Like the people that were doing it and doing it for a while were jacked. Like,
and I think that you can quickly fall into the trap of like that being like a correlation equals causation thing. It's like, well, of course they're jacked. They wouldn't have got there otherwise. But if you actually pay attention to their training style, like people like to make fun of like some of the way that Flex do stuff or whatever. But those guys are still around and still at the top. Like Russ, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And he's jacked and he has the genetics, whatever, and he works hard and whatever. But like there is something to be said about and his whole thing was bodybuilding.
Mm.
Coincidentally, his whole thing prior and during, his whole brand was built around it, and just like slowly getting better was literally the motto for his brand. I don't know what it was exactly, but it was like get better today, right? And so that implies like slowly just chipping away.
Mm.
And I think that people they miss that part where it's like it's not a sprint.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about chipping away at it for the long term. Do you know who Kyle Curvey is?
No.
Kyle Curvey, he did the abs comp I was at just recently. He went to break Jesus's sleeved record. Kyle Curvey's enhanced. He's a IFBB pro as well. But like perfect example, guys jacked to the gills, bodybuilder. Bodybuilders make great powerlifters if they commit and actually do powerlifting programming. And a lot of the time, bodybuilders move a lot better as well.
The proprioception seems to be a lot better.
Yeah, well, they tend to be bendier. Like I find bodybuilders tend to be, as in if you put side by side a bodybuilder that's coming from bodybuilding fresh to powerlifting versus a powerlifter, and they've both been in the gym for say 10 years, they're both using gear or not using gear, whatever. Side by side, oftentimes the powerlifter is more beat up. And I would put it down to not enough variability in movement and training because of hyperspecificity. Mm-hmm. Like if anything, like even if you're like, fuck hypertrophy, who cares? Which you should care. But like moving better so you can lift more weight so you feel healthier. There's huge other benefits to doing hypertrophy style training than just getting jacked. But I mean, getting jacked's the best benefit. Mm-hmm. What would you say to the crowd of people that might come and say, I hear what you're saying, hypertrophy is important, but I'm a 93 kilo lifter. I can't afford to get any heavier.
How many people are really in that situation? We're either being delusional about how lean we are, right? Oh, I'm so shredded, I can't get any more shredded for comp. You probably can. Whatever you think you are, and this includes me, add like 3 or 4% onto it in terms of body fat. And then, I mean, look, get better at water cutting, get leaner. And if you truly, like, this is the equivalent of like women being worried they're going to wake up jacked. I wake up and I'm 100 kilos lean. So you're not even, first of all, that happens when we bulk really fast and get fat, which we know is not necessary. And nutrition's a whole other thing. But, being ever so slightly above maintenance is probably going to give you your maximum rates of muscle growth. So let's just push back on the whole idea. We've got to like move up to the, 93, move up to the 105s and then cut down and water cut after that. It's like, if you're a 93 now and you got to 95 in 2 years time, that would probably be like the maximum rate that you could grow. And that's being super generous, maybe 94. If you think that an extra kilo, you can't water cut that down or or drop some body fat and carbs to like get rid of that, it's just not happening. Like there is people in that situation are probably not going to listen to this. Like the Russell Orhis of the world who probably struggle with that sort of, I literally can't get any bigger. They're probably not listening. So chances are like there's the belief that we have to bulk and get fat to like grow muscle at a maximum rate. You don't. Bulking, you want an energy surplus, a tiny one, and you want to gain weight like ever so slightly. Like I'm talking grams a month, not kilos, grams, and not much of those either. But then I just think like, how many people are actually in that situation? Yeah. How many lifters you actually let's do a little bit less in accessories because you're just too big. Because at that point they'd be like, fuck it, I'll move up a class.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just highlighted the big problem, which is like, I mean, you should aim for hypertrophy, and as you get bigger, you are going to get heavier. But the rate at which that happens is so slow in terms of true muscle gain, including for enhanced lifters. Like natty people are going to be even slower. But the whole mindset of like, okay, I'm committing to the 105s from the 93s now. Oh, I made it to 105. I put on 7 kilos of muscle in a year. It's like, you didn't though. You didn't.
You're lucky to put on 7 in 5 years. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. The whole, like, I'm moving up a weight class like next year. Like, you can compete in that weight class, but like if you're a 93, compete at 95 in a year's time, and then maybe 97 2 years later, like a year later. Like, you can get there slowly, because being fatter, fat doesn't contract. So like, you might anecdotally walk around and be like, yeah, I bulked up and I'm in the new weight class, and you know, some of it was fat, but it just feels so much better. Either you were like too lean, which again is nobody's problem, or we're just being delusional about how much weight we put on, and the anecdote is just, oh yeah, I'm heavier, so I feel better. Well, it's like, well, that's it could be anything. So like, go up slowly.
Yeah.
And like, the fat's not going to contract. It's going to probably make for worse positioning in every lift. And yeah, maybe having more energy makes you feel a little bit better, but like, just fix your nutrition. Like, there's so many ways around. Like, you can just argue around all that stuff.
Well, I mean, the biggest argument that I would say from my position of experience is that, let's say I'm coaching Geordie and he's going from 93 to 105 and he goes to 103 in 6 months. And he gets a hell of a lot stronger because he was holding himself back in the 93s because he was kind of at that point where he needed to go up or whatever. All that's going to happen if he puts on too much weight too fast is that another 6 or 12 months down the track, he's going to go, oh, I'm too fat and I got to cut. And then he cuts for 6 months and stalls his progress because he's limited in how hard he can push in the gym because he's in a calorie deficit. Well, like, you just delay the average growth of progress by putting this cutting phase later on. Yeah, sure, you might get a big boost at the start, but it's going to catch up to you in some way, shape, or form.
Well, that's the exact same metaphor as we use for the frequency thing.
Yeah,
like you can get there. Let's say it's the same finish point. You can get there faster, but it usually causes issues, and usually you don't get there at the same. Like, usually you don't get there at all.
Yeah.
And the whole like powerlifting, I think there's a whole conversation to be had about nutrition as well. Like, obviously we're doing hypertrophy stuff, but it's inherently related, obviously, and there's this whole idea that like, oh, it doesn't matter as much for powerlifting, like what body fat I'm at. Because we've established in bodybuilding pretty, you know, it's a pretty agreeable topic now that like, being fatter is super counterproductive. For example, you're less insulin sensitive, right? The same goes for powerlifting. We're harping on about like hypertrophy, and then like I said, it's inherently important for that, so it has to be important for powerlifters. So like, we're sort of, and I don't want to like be fallacious and be like, oh well, make the argument that we can't do two things at once. We obviously can, but you can be super specific and, you know, like, focus on your nutrition. But let's like try to hit the nail on the head first in the big areas, like do our whole session programs, do it well, eat well. Yeah, and then you could, of course, can, you know, be hyper specific. You can do all those things. It'd be fallacious to say that you can't, but like, most people can't. You can. It's possible, but most people can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think powerlifting is in a better place with nutrition than it probably ever has been. But there's still some of that lingering mindset. Or just, some. I think it probably exists a little bit more into powerlifting bodybuilding, as in people who have come from bodybuilding might be a little bit more relaxed about it because they're like, I don't have to be stage lean. Or just like the mindset or the carried stigma around like, okay, well, powerlifting, you can just eat whatever you want, and eat cookies and get fat, or eat lollies all day, or whatever it is. I think in the powerlifting world as a standalone, people are probably a little bit more conscious about nutrition. And at the end of the day, it shouldn't, we shouldn't have to have this discussion. It should just be like, your nutrition matters for performance. The best powerlifter you can be is the leanest powerlifter in the weight class, because that means you've maximized your muscle growth. Like, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Do you think it's improved a lot since you started in power? Like, because you've been around for 15 years.
Yeah.
Is there a lot more emphasis on it?
Yeah, for sure. Like, it was very much the glorified to be like, oh yeah, I had a whole pizza to carb up for today. You know, like it was very glorified back then.
I've done that. I have actually done that back in the early days. Didn't realize, didn't know what digestion was. Hadn't looked at that before.
The irony of carbing up for a strength sport as well, like carbing up comes from endurance sports. It's just maximizing like available glycogen
Using
you're
it
going to
for
have.
2 seconds.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, I'm going to carb up to use mainly creatine. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a big misunderstanding of how many carbs you can actually store as well. The math is decently simple. You should be able to do about, let's say, 10 times your. So if I'm 100 kilos,
yeah,
I should, if I'm completely depleted, be able to absorb and store, say, 1,000 grams of carbs. And that's going to come with 3 to 4 grams of water. So 3 or 4 kilos in total, maybe 4.
Yeah.
If I went from completely depleted to completely full, if I had good digestion, good insulin sensitivity. So like if you are, let's just say, for example, we'll use 100 kilos because the math is easy. If you're 100 kilos, let's say at all times you have a couple hundred carbs in you because you eat well, and you do like 700-800 carbs, like that's not, there is a huge tipping point before you go hypoglycemic for a start, or like you're just not storing it. And I think that like little details like that, like bodybuilders know that math because you got to get ready to go on stage and you want to be full but not drip over and all that sort of thing. But the same thing works with powerlifting, but you don't need to do that for powerlifting.
Yeah.
You need to be full on the bodybuilding stage for a certain look. You're not chewing through 1,000 stored carbs in a powerlifting meet.
Yeah.
Maybe in a marathon, but not in a powerlifting meet. So like understanding that math, for example, is not hard, and understanding that you don't even need to do that. I think that the carbs are undervalued in bodybuilding amongst the whole like carbs make you fat sort of people come from that era, and overvalued in powerlifting, like the crazy intra carbs that you see in the gym and whatnot, either way too fast or way too slow, never the perfect amount somehow.
I would go further as in like the overvalue of how much you need intra-workout carbohydrate sources. It's like, how much do you actually need that?
Powerlifters don't train hard enough to need it anyway.
Yeah. And shouldn't be training that long to require it.
No, not at all. Not at all. Especially if it's cold. This is one thing, and this is more, bodybuilding science, but the powerlifting, they'll benefit. It's all the same. Let's say, for example, you're chatting, and then we go back to the exercise. It's like one of the subsequent sets, and it was harder or worse than the first set. The science is super simple. You just lost one of the effects that makes us stronger because you spoke for too long, or because you spoke for too long and it's a little bit chilly, or because it's just a little bit too cold in general and you rested for too long. So like there's a lot of bodybuilding science that like very, very easily explains why things happen in powerlifting. But because powerlifters are not open to like science-based whatever, because it's silly and new and stupid and the demographics a little bit younger, we overlook these like super important principles where they just so easily answer these questions that powerlifting coaches say, oh, we don't know. It's like, no, we do. And I think we've said this a lot. Like we often hear that people say, we don't know why this happens. And it's, some specific example, we do know why it happens. It's really easy to explain. Like there's a lot of variables, but for example, you can look at someone's block and, oh, we don't know why week 4, week 5 didn't go well. It's like, I can spot it. I can tell you from looking at this that there's way too much of this, or this day is this amount of volume is way too close to this primary session. Like if you have got a primary SBD lift and you are training that muscle the day before, stop. That's a big problem. Even if it's 2 days before, that you can get away with that, but like volume dependent, position dependent, intensity dependent, depending on the person as well, you're pushing it 48 hours out from a primary. 72, okay, we can chill here. But like if things like that, it's like, oh, I don't know why this primary deadlift day is going poorly. It's like, yeah, you're doing hyperextension the day before. Of course it's going terribly. What do you mean you don't know? You're fatigued, reduction in performance. Like, and that is not even an exaggeration. That is an exact example from a year or so ago that I had brought to me. It's like my primary deadlift's going really poorly, and this was not the lifter's fault. I was like, dude, you have, not even exaggerating for the video, 8 sets of hamstrings 48 hours prior. They're all in the stretch position. It was RDL and like back extension. So basically the same movement. And I was like, hey, next week do 2 of those, 2 of the 8 sets. And the next block, he's like, oh, bro, hit my all-time life goal deadlift PR. I was like,
well, that really just kind of brings it back full circle to what we were saying earlier in terms of, coaches are building programs without the basis of what actually makes muscle stronger. Because once you understand that, it informs your exercise selection. It informs your intensities. It informs your volumes. It informs the days between sessions. It informs all of that, the frequencies. Everything is dictated by that. And again, I have respect for the people like this coach that you were talking to. They were actively trying to solve the problem. They were looking for it, and they'd probably made a bunch of tweaks along the way, but because they didn't have that fundamental understanding, which to you seems really simple, to me seems really simple, because we've figured it out in a different way or had different influences or whatever. Most coaches just don't have that. They come into the world, they try and figure it out as they go along. They get inspired by other coaches who have done the same thing. They follow education of people who have done the same thing and figured it out for themselves. But as soon as you encounter a problem, the first thing you do is shift the blame. You just go, oh, well, this person's not able to deadlift on this day because they're not primed for it. Or they,
define that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They're not primed for it. They're not the bench that we did the day before had too much volume, so they're carrying too much CNS fatigue. You just start throwing words at it to make a justification instead of going, oh, no, we just trained hamstrings really hard, way too much a couple of days before. The hamstrings are still fucked, and so the deadlift suffered because of it. Take away that, bam, problem solved.
Yeah, I think when I obviously don't do this, and please don't DM me this, but like in the past, I have looked at people's programs, like just like they will say, hey bro, can you have a look at this? What do you think? I'm like, okay, I'll do this for free. Don't do this anymore, obviously. But I look straight at the accessories. If we have an SBD problem, like assuming they're doing the lift, I'm probably better off looking straight at the accessories. Oh, you're doing like nothing for the quads and your squat's not getting any better? Maybe start there. Or we're doing like way too much, or it's just like there's a huge, because this is the thing. As long as you're growing muscle, you will get stronger. Even if your technique sucks and you don't practice that much, you will, right? But if you're not growing muscle, which sounds like an exaggeration, but some people are just not growing muscle, full stop, because there's so many things they're doing wrong. SBD will go up marginally for a little until you cap out on the possible coordination gains you have. And then the massive driving factor, the sustainable factor, the muscle growth, does not kick you along. So I always look straight at the accessories. Okay, we're doing like 2 sets of leg extension and then like an RP7 set of belt squat, like for whatever. It's like, 1 set after our low bar for extra like squat volume. So maybe we could make that a little better.
Where you're holding onto the handles and stripper squatting it up anyway.
Yeah. So it's like you almost can't even count it with the moment arms and the way you complete, like So it's like, oh, we're doing like 1 or 2 sets of leg extension that you did to RP7 for 3 weeks in a row, and then RP9 in the final week because we do that for some reason. And is it Mach 10 or Mach 5 for the speed? Mach 10, I don't know. It was all completed with way too much momentum, way too fast. Like, let's start here with this stuff, fix this up for a block, and just see what happens to SBD. Like I find that most people have kind of figured out SBD programming. Yes, we can obviously do things for like, more specific sumos with, close, wide stance sumos and those like hyper specific lifts where, yeah, you can get into the nitty gritty. And I know people, I have friends still in American powerlifting who are great at that stuff. But those people are actually, they interact a lot with my stuff as well. And so they have a lot of respect for sort of this argument that I'm making where, yeah, like I said, I've mentioned Noriega a few times. If you are like that, go ahead and like maybe overanalyze there a little bit for that hyper stuff. But most people are just missing the big picture, which is the accessories. And that's where I look straight away for like, okay, well, either doing way too much like that hamstring example, or you're just not growing muscle full stop, a combination of like accessories and nutrition and just like being too fatigued from SBD in general. And I just start there. And
would you say that's the most common thing you saw when you were looking at people's programs like that?
Even if I was to look now, I like, because I'm still sort of I still pay attention a little bit. I would say it's the same, but that was definitely the key thing was like the SBD's programming is like good enough to the point where like I might have done it a different way, but that's based on just my experience, and not necessarily because I think their way is wrong. Like, oh yeah, I can see why this is working. I'd probably do this, but it wouldn't make a big difference. The accessories are where you're like really going wrong. It's like SBD programming, there's the reason that we have such a big issue with our approach in powerlifting is because powerlifting is all anecdotes, and powerlifters don't like to accept that hypertrophy does not work that way. Like, I love a good anecdote as much as the next guy, but like, we have science for that. Thank God, right? Because if we had powerlifting science, it'd be a lot easier too. There's Olympic lifting data. It's helpful, I'm sure. I'm not in Olympic lifting. If we had powerlifting data, that would be helpful as well, but we do not. There's basically nothing. The only data that you powerlifters have is the stuff that we talk about, hypertrophy stuff, and maybe there's some strength stuff, but like, it's in the form of books. I don't know, you'd know more about it than me. There's like some old good strength books, like the Strength Pyramid or whatever, but nobody programs like that anymore. So I think that literally the only evidence that powerlifters have is this hypertrophy stuff, and all the other evidence is anecdote. And that's where, like, I can't say an anecdote is wrong, because you can't, but technically you can say science is wrong. And we do.
Yeah. Man, I think that, I really think that kind of sums it up really nicely. Was there anything else major that you wanted to touch on? While you think of it, I'd say the most common thing I see when I look at other people's programs in that lens, which I do next to never, basically only when I'm mentoring
For a big
coaches. Only when I'm mentoring coaches do I ever see that sort of stuff. But from what I've seen on the internet and what people post and talk about and what I've listened to in podcasts and things like that, the most common thing I probably sit a little bit more in the middle in terms of the hyperfrequency problem, because it impacts the accessory selection then too. Like, people are finding out where can they fit in the 4th bench session or the 3rd squat session, the 3rd deadlift, in favor of other stuff that could be making you strong. And then the selection of accessories is almost tokenistic. It's kind of like, I need a gap fill this particular day where they're doing 3 sets of squats and 4 sets of bench. They've probably got a little bit more juice, so let's chuck a couple of rows in there. That's very much what it feels like. Mm-hmm. Or it feels like the accessory selection is very much like, I know that a big back means big bench, but arms, they're just cosmetic. Who cares about that? You get enough tricep exposure while you're doing bench press. Don't worry about that. Chucking some dips maybe on one other day. Like, it's all very tokenistic and just an afterthought. There isn't enough reverence put on it in terms of how big an impact hypertrophy has in long-term strength gains.
And now that you mentioned that, like, we've been talking programming theory, like, approaches. We haven't even touched on, like, execution. Like, powerlifters will send, 5-minute voice feedback coaches about, like, the foot pressure on the deadlift, and then it's like, oh yeah, and the leg extensions were good, whatever. It's like, were they? Maybe they were, but we obsess over SBD technique, and again, it is very important because that is literally what coordination is. It's what is the path of the path of least resistance, or what is the best for me, or whatever, however you want to look at it. What can produce the most force is inherently the final answer, and we overlook the accessories, where it's like, oh, it doesn't really matter how you execute that. It's like, what do you think bodybuilding coaches do in the off season? Like if accessories don't really matter that much, why does anyone have a bodybuilding coach in the off season? They're not prepping. Just eat 2 grams of protein and piss off. It's like, no, because execution matters so much. How we do things for accessories inherently dictates how much hypertrophy you get, like the execution of it, in the same way that execution on your squat and having better execution gives you a better squat. And I don't actually think that powerlifters think that doesn't matter. Maybe I should rephrase it. I think that they don't know.
Yes.
They know it matters, but they don't know where to look because no one in powerlifting talks about it. And as soon as you talk about it, it's like, oh, who cares?
Yes.
And that's where it's like, we know that the execution matters. I've coached powerlifting coaches. They know the execution matters, but it's just, they don't know where to go from there. Like, for example, a year ago, I was like, I know that gut health's important. I know that mine's bad, but I didn't even know where to start. Like, where do you even start for that? When I know a lot more about it now, but I think there's the same thing with accessories. Like, I know this leg extension matters. That's an easy example. I know this lat pull down matters, right? But what's good lat pull down technique? And I think that's sort of been the appeal to some people with my page for powerlifting, because I get the respect of like, oh, this guy knows powerlifting a little bit. Like, I've seen his clients. His accessory advice is probably right. And I get a lot of messages like that, like from powerlifters specifically, where it's like, they trust me sort of because of my association with you, Or like they'll see someone who follows me. It's like, bro, did you know that Jeff Nippard? I was like, yeah, that's cool. Okay, if that buys your respect and like your trust, great. Whatever works for you. Like, but just trust me when I say that, you know, this stuff matters a lot. And I think maybe it's not that we don't think it matters. Maybe some, but I think that I should correct myself and say we know it matters. We just don't know where to look.
Well, as frustrating as that is, it's social proof. That's what matters. The Jeff Nippard thing.
I use that just to tell everyone that Jeff follows me.
Yeah, perfect. Because I've never pushed for social media, you know, and maybe I've pushed a little bit more in the last year or two and grown quite a bit more in the last year or two. You still can't really count that as a push. It's like posting once a week instead of once a month. And even then I don't post once a week. It's like once a fortnight at best. But you know, one of the most frequent comments I get is, "I've never heard of you." Like, okay,
thanks.
Okay, that doesn't mean I'm fucking stupid.
That just means that we've got to up the marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
Increase the Instagram budget.
Exactly, yeah. But I mean that whole point on execution is so good, and you know, I would attribute, because I would say that I've figured out I've stumbled on a lot of good practices and ideas, not necessarily accidentally. Like, it's been a defined, intensive, I guess, scientific process for me anecdotally, like looking at my own stuff and being, does this work? Does this not work? How do I challenge this? How do I make it better? But I've stumbled into a position where I've done a lot of the right things over the years, like obsess over the performance of accessories, probably through a different lens rather than hypertrophy, more for like performance of the power lifts. But then you learn stuff like this from people like you, or the scientific community, and you're like, oh, it should. Anyone listening to this, even if you disagree with us, you can't argue with the science to some degree. If there's good science on something, you need to be like, that's why that affirms this part of my practice, and that kind of disproves this part of my practice. What can I improve about that? Like, we're not sitting here telling you need to do exactly what we would do. Like, Deklan and I would probably write powerlifting programs slightly different, just because of our own biases, our own beliefs, our own experiences. But it's more, the stuff that we're saying is about you going introspective and asking the questions of like, where does this reign true for me? What questions does this answer? If I look back in time, why did that person not make progress? Was it because I was giving them only SBD and hardly any accessories, or when I was giving accessories, they were afterthoughts? Whatever it may be, is kind of the bell you're looking to hear, right? But yeah, I mean, execution on accessories, that's a whole market. I think you should be, you're already leaning into it. It's probably something I should be talking about a little bit more, is the actual performance. But then I think about me, and like, as far as something like a leg press or a leg movement like that, rows specific to powerlifting, lat pull downs, all that sort of stuff, my knowledge is all specific to the movement of powerlifting, rather than what you talk about with joint angles and mechanical tension. And like, we were just looking at a chest press machine out there, and Deklan was talking me through how the levers are working, and then where that puts stress on the muscle and which muscles. I don't have that level of knowledge, and I'm in my position in powerlifting, and I should. You know, it's something that I need to brush up on. It just kind of highlights the knowledge gap, because we don't go and do a powerlifting course and learn all this stuff. That's why we've created this course.
Well, it didn't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole, like you said, there's a whole market for execution stuff, because you have to, there's anatomy, right? What is the function? Like, well, the lat's going to like adduct the humerus in towards the body, or pull the arm in towards the body. Cool. That's good knowledge, right? That tells you should do this. Okay. But then when you're actually doing the lat pull down, like, where do you put your hands? Because that's mechanics. That's a whole other subject of like, what does the joint angles, as you said, right? And then it's like, well, what range of motion should you use? And that's a combination of mechanics, biomechanics, and physiology. Because then there's an argument to be made about like which muscles are doing what, and that's physiology, not necessarily just anatomy. And then there are like three subjects. There's anatomy, physiology, and biomechanics that go into a movement. And it's not just like just the anatomy. Oh, like the lat pulls the arm down. Sure, right? But that's not the whole piece. That's months and months of university subjects there in just like, not that specific example, but those topics in general. And I can understand why there's not much information on that. There's some hypertrophy for powerlifting information. It's out there. When I asked on my story, like, does anyone know of anything that exists? Because I said this is the first one to exist. And I was like, correct me if I'm wrong. And someone said that someone had done some like hypertrophy stuff, nothing too official. And I went and looked, and I didn't think it was accurate. So I'm happy to steal the first ever. I didn't think it was great. I don't even remember who it was, but there's just nothing out there.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've just defined our second course anyway, Anatomy for Powerlifters. Anatomy for Powerlifting. All right, man. Well, we've taken up an hour. Any final comments?
No, I mean, thank you for listening, and thanks for having me on. I guess this is a joint podcast. Thanks for having me in.
Thanks for having me on.
This is not my space.
All right. We'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.